Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're doing part 104 of our Planet Zoo mod spotlights, where we take a look at some of the wonderful mods people have been making and use them to talk about some of the wonderful biodiversity that we share our world with. And today, we're going over a few mods because there hasn't been too many mods over this past 1.11. But we've got some really interesting, cool mods that we get to talk about. A lot of really interesting animals, and Level Wolf's return, of course, which is always fun. But yeah, let's get stuck into it. So we're going to be starting off with a bird today. We have got here very interesting animal. This is the Victorian crowned pigeon. So this is by Leaf and Mega Gaming Rex, or MGR. So this Victoria crowned pigeon. These guys are a large bluish grey pigeon, as you can kind of see there, with that big blue lance-like crests and those red irises and kind of maroon breast, as you can kind of see in there, which is really cool. Very interesting animal. These are part of a genus called Gura, which are four very large, primarily ground-dwelling pigeons that come from New Guinea. These birds are also quite easily recognizable because of their unique white tips of their wings, and also on its crest as well, and kind of that deep whooping call that they make. And it gets its name from the British monarch Queen Victoria, so the Victorian crowned parakeet. I mean, I can always see parakeet. I keep saying pigeon. There's a pigeon actually, not a parakeet. The Victorian crowned pigeon. These guys, you can see a dark, deep or blue greyish color with that small mask there. Also got maroon tips to their wings, and in all the crown pigeons, there's melanism's been observed, so they've been quite dark. And the other two crowned pigeons are quite similar in that regard, but only the western crowned pigeon overlaps with the Victorian species, so they don't really overlap. But these guys are quite large. This species is typically about 73 to 75 centimeters, or 29 to 30 inches in length. And some specimens have even been known to exceed 80 centimeters, or 31 inches in length, and weigh 2.5 kilograms. It is marginally larger than the other two species of crowned pigeons, and at a mean of average of 2.3 kilograms, or 5 pounds, in adult body mass, which makes it the largest surviving species of pigeon on Earth, which is really interesting. And the standard measurements for the mainland ones are kind of like a 30 centimeter long tail. The bill was like 3 centimeters and all that. And like other crowned pigeons, this species makes a loud clapping sound when they take flight, and the mating calls of this species are similar to those of the other species of crowned pigeons. They have a deep hooter kind of sound, which is quite interesting. And when defending their territories, they make a resounding whoop up call, and their contact call is kind of a deep, muffled and rather human-like or which is quite interesting. There's two subspecies of the Victorian crowned parakeet, with one found on mainland New Guinea and the other found on the islands of Yapen, Baik, and Sapori, I believe you said that. And they're not too different from each other. They're just the nominate subspecies, a little bit smaller, with less robust legs and a little bit less plumage. That typically happens with island species. It's not too different from how that happens. But these guys typically live in lowland forests around northern New Guinea and the surrounding islands, typically found in alluvial plains and forests as well. Though they're typically found at or near sea level, they may venture up to elevations about 30,000 feet, and they fly from sea to tree every day, which is pretty interesting. In terms of behavior, these guys are gregarious, so they like hanging out together. They usually travel in pairs or small parties when they look around for food, and they walk with an unhurried gait along the forest floor. Their food typically consists of fallen fruit, and birds of this species have in captivity particularly like figs and things like that. Seeds and invertebrates may also be eaten, but when they're disturbed, the birds will fly straight into the canopy or a large horizontal branch, and after being disturbed, they may remain on their perch for a considerable amount of time, using contact calls and flapping their wings, but they still can still occasionally be approached. The males also regularly engage in aggressive displays to establish their dominance, with pigeons puff up their crests and raise their wings as they prepare to strike for opponent. They actually make short dashes at each other and may actually hit one another, but they really make contact, and they're typically quite peaceful, especially males towards other males during the breeding, the early mating season. Other than that, they're typically pretty chill, but when it's the breeding season, they go a bit hard on each other. In terms of their reproduction, breeding peaks during the late wet season or in the dry season, where the males and females, the males will display to the females. He lowers his head down, stretches forward, and then swings his head while wagging his fan tail, which makes this kind of really interesting display. Although the female does most direct brooding, both parents actually help raise the young. The female usually lays a single white egg in a well-built tree nest on stems and palm leaves and sticks. And in the weeks before she lays her eggs, the male brings nesting material to the female, and the incubation typically lasts about 30 days, and the young will leave the nest when they are much smaller than their parents, but they are actively tended to for a total of about 13 weeks or so. And the status of this pigeon, the Victoria crown pigeon is actually quite rare compared to the other species, although they're the most widely spread in captivity. The most biggest pressures that they have are things like habitat loss due to logging, though they're now quite uncommon near human habitations. Also, they're heavily hunted, and they're quite tame and can be easily shot. Now they seem to be more fearful of humans now, and most hunting is for plumage and for their meat. And trading of pigeons to be kept alive in captivity is illegal, but still seems to occur. And due to these factors, they're considered near threatened by the IUCN. But yeah, really, really awesome animals. Leaf and MGR really did a great job giving us a wonderful pigeon. I keep saying pigeon because New Zealand we have crowned parakeets, and I keep saying parakeets, but not pigeons. So yeah. But anyway, beautiful pigeon done by Leaf, Mega Gaming Rex. Next one's done by Mega Kebab. How can you not love Mega Kebab? So we have got this really cool little monkey here. I believe it's a baby. We'll find an adult. But we have got the Gabon Talapoin, I believe you say that. I'm not sure you say that. But it's also known as the Northern Talapoin. These guys are kind of a small species of African monkey native to the Cameroon, Gabon, Western Republic of the Congo, and those kind of areas, but have also been introduced to the Canary Islands. So these guys are from head to body length. Let's see if we can find one, not in the long. There we are, here we are. Head to body length, these guys are about 230 240 millimeters or 9 to 13 inches, and they weigh between 0.8 to 1.2 kilograms or 1.8 to 2.6 pounds. With males being larger typically, and they take about 6 years to reach their full adult size, which has a head to body length of 260 to 360 or 10 to 14 inches, and weigh between 1 to 1.72 kilograms. And they also have an average tail length of about 12 to 18 inches or 310 to 45 millimeters. And infants typically weigh about 180 grams, and the size of a newborn's head is almost as big as its body, so that's quite cute. These guys are the smallest of the old world monkeys, which is another cute little fact about these guys, and are considered dwarf gonodons, as they got that large head, and unlike the related Angolan tapon, these guys have flesh-coloured, not blackish ears and facial skin. And there's no distinct colour differences between mature males and females and the young, though these guys are also short-furred and have quite this vivid, like olive crown and black coat, with the golden yellow on its limbs as well, and a dark tip to their tail. And the islands are like yellowish in colour, with notable dark streaks on their noses and cheeks, and they have cheek pouches that is used for storing food. And one funny fact is that the females typically have pink sexual swellings, and males can have large pale blue scrotums, which is quite funny. In terms of the habitat, as I mentioned, they're typically found around the river Ongore, which is around like Cambodia and the Congo River, then Cameroon, Equatorial Guinea, Republic of the Congo, and Cambindia would be we found them. And they've been documented in a few forests and some like transitional zones between forest and savanna, which is quite interesting. And the distribution may even be larger than that, but we really just don't have confirmation of it. But these guys are equatorial riverine animals, and they're typically always found within 500 meters or so of a water body, such as rivers or swamps. And although owing to its small size, they usually are reliant on thick covering to protect themselves from predators. And you're usually found near dense riverbank vegetation, or agriculture. These guys are seldom ascend to the high level of the trees. And population densities may actually double near human settlements due to availability of new sources of cultivated food and secondary growth due to land clearing and protection from predators due to the presence of humans. So that's pretty interesting. In terms of their diet, these guys usually find their food on the ground, and such terrestrial foraging is seldom observed due to their small size, and they like to hang out in dense areas, so it's usually not seen. And they usually do this in small groups, where they have a session feeding in the morning and then another session in the afternoon. Fruits make up about 80% of their diet. They like plums and figs and abella trees and things like that. They'll also feed in terms of insects. About a third of their diet will be like beetles, butterflies, caterpillars, and spiders. And cultivated plantations such as pawpaws, maize, and bananas are actually quite attractive food sources for these guys as well. And they will often find food on there. And the food and insect-rich diets of these guys actually balance the seeds of... they spread the seeds of many plants and also help with the maintenance of insect colonies, which is a pretty cool fact about these guys. In terms of their social life, these guys are highly social and they're not really known to be territorial. They lived in mixed male and female groups from about 2 to 20, with a larger portion of females to males. And adult males guide the movement of the group and safeguard the group by keeping lookout at night. Gabon Tapolins are actually move into subgroups during the day, with pregnant lactating females and their babies forming one, juveniles following mixed male and females in separate subgroups, and adult males kind of leading and trailing the group as well to protect it, which is quite interesting. They also, as I mentioned, they usually rest between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m., with adult females staying in the center of the group and then the males kind of hanging around there. They also have quite a few vocalizations to describe a variety of carnivores, such as raptors and snakes, due to their tiny size. They have 11 different vocalizations that they use to identify different predators and things like that, which is really interesting. And female tapons, or Gabon tapons, how you say them, are able to give birth once they reach the age of 4 years old. And mating seasons will typically take place during the dry season between June and August. They have a specific mating call to kind of talk to each other. And social dominance ranks also influence the sexual behavior. So females will then present themselves to the male, and then they groom, and then have contact, and then they will copulate. And all females would tend to give birth typically during that raining season between the months of November to April. And outside breeding seasons, males and females tend to segregate and move higher up in the trees. And in terms of their affections, they display affection towards their young and members of the group, but female aggression towards the male is also a key trait to their social structure. So mothers typically take the role of caring for the young and known to reject advances by other females to carry the infant. And these guys, for being little monkeys, they're quite long-lived. They can be known to live up to 28 years of captivity, but we don't know what they live like in the wild. As we have a look at these cute little babies there, but they're a bit too big. They mimic nature. The miniature nature of these guys makes them hard to track down and makes research on them difficult. And their bird-like vocalizations often mislead research teams that are not familiar with this species. They think they're birds, but they're not actually monkeys, which is quite funny. And in terms of their conservation status, these guys are considered decreasing population and considered near threatened by the IUCN. And it's because of widespread... they are widespread at the moment and often associated with villages, but some groups have been disappearing. This decline has been attributed a lot to hunting activity, overhunting of larger animals and things like that. People hunting the monkeys for food. Also, monkeys being purchased and smuggled by hunters and poaching, and also habitat degradation, things like that, and diseases have been a big impact on their population. So conservation sites around their range have been put to protect the land and water that they live in. So they're not in danger of going extinct in a long while, but they are obviously impacted by human activities, which is quite funny. Well, not quite funny, but... quite good that they're obviously protecting things like that. I think I was just looking at a picture. It's a funny picture. Anyway, we're next up from Bigger Kebab. We're having a look at, by leaf, we've got the eastern spotted skunk. Really cute little guy. Really, really cool. So these guys are a really funny little guy. They are a relatively slender skunk that's found in North America, as implied from the eastern United States, and they're found in Mexico and Canada in small areas as well. So these guys have that small weasel-like body with dense black fur and these kind of spotted stripes going down their body, which gets their name, the spotted stripes. They are known as an aseptic pattern, and this is kind of thought to be a warning to predators saying, hey, don't mess with me, things like that. The typical body length for an eastern spotted skunk is between 24 and 26 centimeters or 9 to 10 inches, with a tail length of 11 to 19 centimeters or 4 to 7 inches, reaching a total length of 35 to 45 centimeters, kind of that size there, decently sized. In terms of their claws, though, their feet have also these little pads that enable them to climb, and these sharp claws as well. And the largest claw on the forefeet helps them dig and grasp prey, and the total body weight of adults tends to be about 400 to 965 grams, or 14 to 34 ounces, which is quite interesting. In terms of the behavior, these guys are quite crafty and secretive, and it's actually quite rare for humans to see them. They are typically nocturnal and tend to be more active during dry, cool nights than warm, wet nights. And although they do not hibernate, they tend to greatly reduce their activity when enduring intensely warm summers or very cold winters. And generally speaking, these guys are the most active, and they are also the more agile and vigilant of the other species of skunks in North America. In addition to performing that handstand they do before they spray at a potential predator, because they have the musk glands similar to other species of skunks, that under the anus, where they create that really, really pungent musk that they use to defend themselves. They'll actually perform foot stamping, where that involves a skunk stamping its feet on the ground in order to warn an approaching animal. The stamping can be heard from several meters away and usually followed by the skunk spraying its odorous solution. And when the skunk encounters an egg that they usually want to eat, they straddle the egg with its front legs and bite it open. And if this fails, we'll actually kick it with the hind limbs and things like that to try and push the egg around and try to open it, which is quite fun. So let's talk about these little babies here, because they're so cute. Look at this little man. Really cute little man. So these guys usually breed between March and April and give birth between late May and early June. On average, a female skunk will give birth to 4 or 5 baby skunks, known as kits, at a time. It typically takes about 12 weeks from the newborn skunks to be fully developed into adult skunks, and 2 months before these guys develop their skink musks, or a skunk musk is used for self-defense to protect themselves. So in terms of conservation, these guys have seen pretty sharp declines in a lot of populations, which is very, very sad, of course. So they're considered vulnerable by the IUCN, particularly in southern states, particularly in the Midwest. The exact reasons we don't really know, but they were pretty much, it was puzzling because they were quick to adapt to human settlement, and they were commonly trapped until the second half of the 20th century. And before then, they were quite common on farmlands where they dig burrows, things like that. And one time in 1949, there was like 19,000 skunks that were taken from the wild in that year alone, and fell sharply after that. A lot of things that people think why they have become vulnerable in terms of the population includes pesticide use, modernization of farming techniques, overtrapping, and the construction of barns and man-made structures have negatively impacted the populations of eastern spotted skunks. And it's potentially actually eradicated them from several Midwestern states, and the whole are declining in that region, which sucks. And when they are not declining, is included places such as southern Florida, but they're naturally uncommon there as well. So they're declining where they're common, and when they're uncommon, they're not declining. So there is a little bit worries about their population. But according to population survey done in Alabama, the Carolinas, and Virginia, the Appalachian spotted skunk, which is a subspecies, has declined at about 3% between 2014 and 2020, with a 50% mortality rate, with predation with owls being the main reason for mortality throughout most of their range. But also canine distemper has potentially gotten to these guys, which is not good, especially in North Carolina. That's where they found the skunk, but these guys can be affected by environments, things like that. So hopefully they get the protection they deserve, because they're quite cool little skunks. I'm a big, big fan. So next up, another one done by Leaf. We have got the Japanese badger. So these guys are a species of carnivoran in the family Mustelidae, so related to weasels and other badgers and mink, as we'll get into, and otters. These guys are a close relative of the European and the Asian badger, and The Japanese name is Amuga, which means a whole badger, which is quite funny. But a whole bear, I mean. But forgive me for my pronunciation. Japanese badgers are generally a little bit smaller. They get on average about 71 centimeters or 31 inches in males, and 72 and 28 in females, and are less sexually dimorphic than their European cattle counterparts. And their tail length is also between 14 and 20 centimeters or 5 to 7 inches. And the species is similar and was mildly larger than the Asian badger, so kind of the in between. And adults typically are between 3.8 and 11 kilograms or 8 to 24 pounds. The average weight for female badgers is about 6 kilograms, or males can be up to 7. And the average spring weight is 4 to 5 kilograms as well for females and males. You can see they've also got that powerful forelimbs for digging, and they've got those powerful claws, and their hind limbs are slightly smaller, and the claws and the hind feet are smaller as well. And they also have those characteristic black-white stripes. They're not quite as distinct as European badgers, but they've also got that. It kind of reminds them of that. They're quite similar. And their eyes are actually, and skulls are actually smaller than that of the European badger. In terms of the origin, the absence of badgers on the island of Hokkaido, I believe you say that, and the presence of a related Asian badger in Korea suggests that the ancestral badgers that became the Japanese badger, they typically believed to have reached Japan through from the southwest via Korea. And genetic studies indicate that there are substantial differences between Japanese and Asian badgers, which were formerly considered the same species, and then they were split to be different species, which is quite interesting. Very similar to most other badgers, these guys are nocturnal and they hibernate during the coldest months of the year. Beginning at about 2 years of age, females mate and give birth to 2 or 3 litters of cubs in the spring, about March and April, and they mate slowly afterwards. But they can also delay implantation until February, which is pretty cool. And Japanese badgers are typically more solitary than European badgers, which are a lot more social. And they do not aggregate in social clans or do not form pair bonds. But during the mating season, the range of a male badger overlaps with that of 2 or 3 females, and badgers with overlapping regions will communicate via scent marking. So in terms of habitats, these guys prefer woodlands and forested habitats, and very similar to other badgers, these guys will feed on earthworms, berries, beetles, pretty much on their seafood diet. They eat it. They're omnivores, which is really, really cool. But sadly, there are some threats to these guys. They are considered least concern, but the populations and range has shrunk. So it's believed to decreased about 7% over the past 25 years, mainly due to the increased land development for agriculture, and also introduced raccoons have been a threat to these guys. Though hunting is legal, but has declined sharply since the 1970s. And there is badger culling things, and people have been eating them in restaurants, but they're worried that might be unsustainable. So hopefully there's some protections put on these guys so they don't become near threatened, but luckily they are still considered common at the moment. And this is a really wonderful mod. It's nice that I get to finally show it off. Really, really beautiful animal. Definitely a big fan. So next up, we're moving on to from Japan to America. We have got here, by Level Wolf, we have got the American badger. Really, really nice guy here. So the American badger, these guys are North American badgers, very similar to the European badger, although they're not that closely related. They typically live in the western, central, and northeastern United States, as well as south central Canada, and certain areas of British Columbia, and also in Mexico. So quite a wide-ranging species. So these guys, as I mentioned, also as well, are a member of mustelids, so they're related to weasels, otters, ferrets, and the wolverine. And they are in their own little family of badgers, which is kind of their own little thing. They're kind of related to, I believe, the prehistoric badgers as kind of their relatives, things like that, which is quite interesting. I really like these guys here. Own little family of badgers. In terms of their characteristics, these guys are kind of the most general characteristics common to badgers. They have that short and low slung body with the powerful legs that they use to dig, and the huge foreclaws, which measured up to about 5 centimeters to dig and hunt prey. And they've got those distinctive head markings very similar to other badgers. They also possess morphological characteristics that allow them to be good diggers. They have a conical head, as you can see here, like almost like a cone. They have bristles between the behind on the ears, and also dictating membranes in the eyes, so that protects their eyes from kind of dirt and stuff getting in their eyes. They also have these quite powerful forelimbs that they use to dig, and lots of very strong and also the attachments of muscles as well. In terms of their size, they generally get between 60 and 75 centimeters, or about 23 to 29 inches in length, with males being slightly larger than females. They also maintain an average weight of about 6 to 7 kilograms for females, and up to about 8 kilograms for males. Northern subspecies or northern populations typically get a little bit heavier than the southern, where their food is plentiful, and adult males can even get up to like 11 to 15 kilograms or 22 to 23 kilograms. And some female in populations in the north, some females can even get up to like 9.5 kilograms or 21 pounds, which is quite interesting. And you can see these guys have quite a really interesting appearance. They've got that grizzled brown, black and white, and also that mixed tan color as well, along with these distinctive marks, black and white pattern, which are also called badges, which is quite interesting, that really give them the characteristic look. And it's really, really cute. I do like badges. So as I mentioned, these guys are primarily fossorial, so they typically like to spend most of their time in the ground, and their typical prey is things such as pocket golfers, ground squirrels, moles, marmots, prairie dogs, pikas, kangaroo rats, deer mice, and voles. And they'll often dig into pursuing that prey as well, and they'll often even sometimes plug tunnels with objects to prevent their prey getting out. They're also quite a significant predator of snakes, such as rattlesnakes, and even considered an important predator of rattlesnakes in South Dakota. They also prey on ground nesting birds such as burrowing owls, bank swallows, sand martins. They also feed on lizards, amphibians, fish, skunks, carrion insects, both honeycombs and bees, and also corn, peas, sunflower seeds, fungi, mushrooms, pretty much whatever. Seafood diet, I like saying that. In terms of their behavior as well, these guys are typically nocturnal. However, when there's areas with no human encroachment, they will actually come out and hang out during the day. Seasonally, though, these guys will often been observed in daylight hours in the spring, March of late to early May, often represents a female foraging during daylight and spending nights with her young. Badgers do not hibernate, but they do become less active during the winter, and a badger may spend much of their winter in torpor that can last around 29 hours, and they cycle through that. They do emerge from their burrows when the temperature is above freezing, though. As a fossorial mammal, or a fossorial mammal, these guys typically use the scratch dig pattern with the forelimbs to break the soil as well. And abandoned badger burrows are actually often occupied by animals of similar sizes. So that could be foxes, skunks, and even things like tiger salamanders, frogs, and burrowing owls will use it as well. And one really fun thing about these guys as well is that they have been seen working with coyotes in tandem when hunting. So typically appearing with a badger and a coyote will follow each other. So one study found that 9% of sightings included 2 coyotes and 1 badger, and one had 1 badger and 3 coyotes. Researchers have followed that the coyote benefits from an increased catch rate of about 33%. While it's difficult to attain the badger's benefit, the badger spends more time underground and active. So the badger is thought to expend less energy while hunting for burrows, which is quite interesting. According to research, this partnership works because of the different hunting styles of both badgers and coyotes. So a ground squirrel, upon spotting a coyote, will crawl into its hole to escape, and upon seeing a badger, they will climb out of the hole and try to outrun the badger. So hunting in tandem raises the prey vulnerability, so it increases the chances of either one getting it. So they both benefit from hanging around each other, which is quite interesting. In terms of their life cycle as well, badgers are normally solitary, but they thought to expand their territories in the breeding season to seek out males or mates. Typically, mating occurs in late summer to early fall, with some males breeding with more than one female. And American badgers also experience a delayed implantation, with pregnancies actually being suspended until December or even as late as February. Young are actually born in late March to early April, and with litters ranging from 1 to 5 years old and averaging about 3. Badgers are also born blind, furred, and helpless, with their eyes opening in about 4 to 6 weeks, and the females are then fed. The female feeds her young then solid foods prior to their weaning, and a few weeks thereafter. And then a young American badger will emerge from their den at about 5 to 6 weeks old. Families will usually break up and the juveniles disperse by the end of June to August, with young badgers, even their mother, around even as early as late May to June. And they typically will just go off and do their thing. There's not really plan to it. Most female badgers will typically become pregnant in their first year after about a year after they are a year old, and the minority of females 4 to 5 months old ovulate, and a few can become pregnant, but the males typically do not breed until their second year of age. And large predators do occasionally kill American badgers, but they typically live up to 9 to 10 years in the wild with a record of 14, and a captive individual even lived for up to 15 years, so they are quite long-lived little men. So in terms of their habitat preferences, these guys typically prefer grasslands and open areas. It includes like parklands, farms, and things with lots of fertile soil or friable soil and lots of rodent prey. That's where they prefer to be. They may also be found in forest glades, meadows, bushy areas, hot deserts, and mountain meadows. And they've been found up to 3,700 meters or 12,000 feet in the higher elevations around the Sonoran and those kind of zones there. Though they will occur in semi-arid grasslands like that around Arizona, in California as well. So they're quite varied and like living in lots of different habitats. Though their typical range will vary a lot due to their season and their sex. So different areas of the home range will usually used more frequently by different animals, depending on the availability of prey. Males will have larger home ranges than females, with the home range of a male typically being, average home range of a badger is typically around 2,100 acres, or about 850 hectares, with one female having one slightly smaller, which was like 1,790 acres in summer and about 5 acres in winter, which is quite interesting. So it shows how they change during the seasons. And in 2015, overdevelopment of these habitats have resulted in reduced range to freeze prey and forced badgers into contact with humans more. So they've been observed with people as well a lot more, which is kind of not good, but at least gives them more opportunity to learn about them and see how really cute they are. So these guys are more commonly found in treeless areas. They're like hanging out with areas with grass-dominated meadows and things like that, and shrubs and things like that, which is quite interesting. And in terms of predation, these guys are quite aggressive, so they typically have few natural enemies, but they're still vulnerable to other species in the habitat, such as golden eagles, coyotes, and bobcats as well. Though bears and grey wolves will occasionally kill badgers, and wild cougars are actually the main predators of adults, and they hunt them more frequently than most other carnivores, with a documented case where the badger is one of the main prey for a collared cat as well. And humans will typically trap them for their pelts, and they're typically used for shaving or painting brushes. But they are typically considered as a whole least concern, still quite common. But there's some local populations, especially subspecies, that have been classed as a endangered species or a species of special concern, just because of local reductions in population due to many factors such as trapping and development hurting their habitats, things like that. That's kind of a good example. But yeah, really, really cool animals done by Level Wolf. I think they did a wonderful job. So next up, we are having a look at another animal that Level Wolf has done. Still in America though, but we're moving on to the American mink. So a real cutie here. So this is another species of mustelid, though it's native to North America, but it's been introduced into Europe, Asia, and South America due to humans, which kind of sucks, of course. But these guys are a more specialized form of the American mink that has been a little bit more into carnivory. The European mink, I mean, they're kind of more adapted for carnivory, so things like that. And there are some populations and subspecies. We don't really need to talk about that. But these guys differ a lot from other members of the genus Mustela, which includes stoats and weasels, as well as other members of Neogale. But they have this large size and stouter form, which is actually much more similar to things such as martens. And they share with martens brushy tail that tapers a little bit, and that cylindrical tail as well. And they're quite similar in build to the European mink, but they do have slightly longer tails. They also have a low body, which allows them to enter the species into burrows of prey, which is things like that. They also have quite a streamlined shape, as you can kind of see there. That helps to reduce water resistance when they swim. And the skull is similar to the European mink, but it's more massive with a shorter cranium and slightly larger developed projections. So they have slightly bigger jaws, things like that. Though domestic mink, which are bred on fur farms, are actually quite different genetically and physically. They have smaller spleens, smaller brains, smaller parts and stuff than wild mink, which is pretty interesting. And in terms of size, male minks get between 13 to 18 centimeters or 34 to 45 centimeters in body length, with females being about slightly smaller, measure about 12 to 15 inches or 31 to 37 centimeters, with the tail measuring about 6 to 10 inches or 15 to 24 centimeters with males, and 6 to 8 or 14 to 21 centimeters with females. The weight will vary a lot between sex and the season, with males generally be heavier than females, and in winter, males can weigh about 1 to 3 pounds or 500 to 1,500 grams, and females 1 to 2 pounds or 400 to 780 grams, with their maximum heaviness being in autumn, so they could probably get a kilogram or two in size, maybe. In terms of fur, as you can see here, these guys have got quite a dense, long and softer fur than the European mink. They typically have a very dark blackish, tawny or light tawny skin, and color has been evenly distinguished around the body, except they have kind of a little bit of a, like a, what do you call it? Underside being slightly lighter, but they also have that little bit on the mouth there that you can kind of see, which is quite interesting. And these guys typically have also captive individuals can have irregular white patches on their body, which though if they escape, they typically lose these. And they typically will molt at different times of the year. They have these long kind of level of fur, this upper level of fur with the guard hairs that allows them to swim better, protects the lower level of fur from the elements, and then the lower level of fur or the undercoat that will really help them stay warm, especially when they go swimming a lot, things like that. It helps them keep warm. And they typically have they molt, so they have a summer coat, and then they have a winter coat. So the longer coat helps in the winter when it's cooler, and then they molt it. And when it's in summer, they typically have that. They typically have guard heads that are kind of considered intermediate between those of otters and polecats, so they kind of are incompletely adapted for aquatic life. They're not quite as adapted to water as otters and things like that, but they're more adapted than things such as like martens and polecats and stoats and things like that. So they're kind of that interesting in the middle there, which is quite cool. In terms of locomotion, these guys typically can move with quite a bounding gait, and they can run up to like 6.5 kilometers or about 4 miles per hour. They're also quite good at climbing trees and swimming well. And during swimming, they'll actually propel themselves through undulating motions of the trunk. And when diving, they actually use bradycardia, which is an adaptation they have to help conserve oxygen. And in warm water, they can swim for up to 3 hours without stopping. But in cold water, they can dive between 27 minutes. They typically can dive to depths of up to 12 inches or about 30 centimeters for about 10 seconds, with 3-meter dives lasting 60 seconds have been recorded. And this is because they like to hang out on the water banks and hunt things on the water back and things like that, as we get into, which is quite cool. And they usually give up chase fish after like 5 or 20-second chases. They're also quite reliant on their sight while foraging, and they're quite good hearing as well. They can hear those ultrasonic vocalizations of the rodent prey. And they also have a kind of weaker sense of smell. They have these 2 anal glands that they use for scent marking, though, very similar to most other kind of carnivores, which is quite cool. And the smell produced by these scent glands is actually believed to be more unbearable than of skunks, and it's added that one of the few substances of animal, vegetable, or mineral origin that has existence as abnormal sensation or dominable sensation called nausea. So that's really interesting. In terms of their social and kind of tutorial behavior, these guys typically are held by individual animals with minimal overlap, but will often overlap with animals of the opposite sex, but not the same sex. They mostly like to live in undisturbed, rocky coastal habitats with broad lithoral zones and dense cover. They live in estuaries, rivers, and canals, even near urban areas. Home ranges are typically between 1 to 6 kilometers long, with male territories being slightly larger than the females. They typically, as long as it's close to den, American mink is not fussy of its choice is den, as long as it's close to water. Mink dens are also kind of typically constructed along the long burrows and riverbanks and logs and things like that, which is quite interesting. And the burrows, they typically will dig them themselves, and are typically 4 inches in diameter and actually may continue 10 to 12 feet in depth and about 3 to feet wide. They will also will nest in burrows that are previously used by badgers, skunks, and muskrats. But they'll also will dig dens out of old anthills, where they make a nesting chamber that's usually about a 4 inch tunnel with a foot in diameter, where they line that with straw and feathers and keep it warm and dry for their babies, which is quite interesting. And also, as well, these guys are not only normally only vocalize during close encounters with mink and other predators. So these guys will emit like hisses and screeches, and that they'll and threatened, and then they'll make some chuckling sounds when they're mating. Kits will also squeak repeatedly for their mothers when they're separated. But during aggressive interactions, these guys will growl and snarl, and then ache their backs and puff up and lash out with their tails, things like that, and also gape their jaws to kind of threaten each other. And they will fight as well. In terms of development and their kind of how they grow up, the American mink, they're quite promiscuous, but they don't really form pair bonds. They start the mating season in February in their southern range and April in the north. In introduced ranges, though, they'll actually breed 1 month earlier than the European mink. Males will commonly fight during the mating season, which may result in them from kind of creating these loose dominance hierarchies, who gets, and the winner gets access to the females. They actually may be quite violent, and the male will typically bite the female by the nape and pin her down. And after they mate and all that, the females will be recepted from a 7 to 8 individual into a 7 to 10 day interval between the 3 week breeding season, and can mate with multiple males. And along with the striped skunk, they can actually mate in the spring and then have delayed implantation, so they're able to basically delay the implantation of the embryo until conditions are right. And the gestation period lasts about 40 to 75 days in these guys, with actual embryonic development taking place about 30 to 32 days. And the young are born from April to June, and litters will consist of about 4 kits on average. And there's been exceptionally large litters of like 11 kits or even 16 kits. But these young kits are usually born blind. They weigh about 6 grams, have a short coat with silver white hairs, and they're dependent on their milk until their eyes open, their eyes open around 25 days, and they typically are weaned about 5 weeks old. The kits will become hunting in about 8 weeks, but they stay close to their mother until autumn, and that's when they become independent. And their sexual maturity is attained during the kit's first spring, where they're about 10 or so months old, which is quite interesting. In terms of their diet, these guys are carnivores, so they're very much eating all sorts of animals. That includes rodents, fish, crustaceans, amphibians, and birds. They kill vertebrate prey by biting the back of their neck as well, and they'll often kill birds much larger than themselves, such as cormorants and seagulls, by drowning them. And in natural range, fish is their primary prey, and although inferior to the river otters to hunting fish, they can be seen hunting trout and things like that as well. But mink inhabiting the prairie slouts, they typically feed on tadpoles, mice, and frogs. They are quite a formidable predator as well, and they'll feed along a lot of fish and mice and even muskrats and things like that. If you've seen Joe on YouTube, he trains minks to hunt Joseph Carter's his name. He trains minks to hunt things, which is really impressive to watch. That shows you the power of them. They'll hunt voles. They'll also feed on birds, rabbits in their native range, and as well as their introduced range, because they are introduced to a lot of places, and they've been considered kind of invasive in a lot of those areas, which is quite sad. In terms of their intelligence, they're also considered quite intelligent. They also were kind of able to distinguish objects and things like that. They often outperform things like ferrets, skunks, and cats at these tasks as well. And they actually are quite smart and quite perceptual as well, which is quite interesting. In terms of natural range, as I mentioned, they live around North America, but they have been introduced to Argentina and Chile and Western Europe, where they have been pushing out the native European mink, along with the USSR and Iceland as well, or Ireland, I mean, which has really been hurting populations of native species, so that's fully considered invasive in that regard. In terms of their wild mink, though, because of the numerous incidents of fur farming and there being escaping, there's been concerns that the possible reconstructions that these guys may actually breed with wild populations. And domestic mink are actually quite a bit larger than wild mink, but it causes problems when they escape. They're also solitary and also intolerant of other mink, and they could potentially outcompete each other, so there's been a little bit worries on that. But it's really been something that has been looked into, but when domestic mink may survive long enough to reproduce, it may cause problems for wild mink populations because of the weaker genetics, and has also been contributing to the decline because they're domestic animals and they don't really know how to survive as well as the wild mink, of course. And though their relationship with humans is quite interesting, they have been used for fur pretty much as far as people went in America, killed for their pelts and things like that. With lots of trapping going on. And also people have been farming them from about the late 19th century because they're easy to keep in captivity and they're quite easy to breed. And that's why they were spread up to all these areas across the world, from Chile to Europe and Russia, because people wanted to breed them for their coats. And that's when they escape, and then they affect the wild populations of European mink and other species and things like that, which is always not good. But due to this, they've been selectively bred for all sorts of different coat patterns, things like that. And they're also quite common as pets. People do keep them as pets, though they're quite difficult to handle, and they're not like a tame like a dog. You need to have some experience, and people do train them for ratting and also killing rats and things like that, which is quite interesting. But yeah, really, really cool animals. I do really like this guy. Really, really awesome. Leverwolf really has done an incredible job bringing us a cool animal. So, last but most definitely not least, we have got here by Doc589, I believe that's correct, Buffsu and Genora Pizza. We have got here an animal from the past. We've got Tylosaurus. So these guys, as I mentioned, are relative of monitor lizards and snakes. Their genus name Tylo, which means knob lizard, which is quite interesting. The quite interesting diagnostic characteristic of Tylosaurus is they have an elongated conical rostrum, which is protrudes from the snout, where they get that name. And unlike typical mosasaurs, these guys do not have teeth right at the end of the snout, nor a bony protuberance on the rostrum, which actually leads to them having believed to be able to ram each other, which is another really interesting thing. And in terms of their size, Tylosaurus and the many other species of Tylosaurus that we have, they're one of the largest species or largest group of mosasaurs of all time. The largest known species, which is this guy, Tylosaurus progenitor, or how you say that, or progenitor, was had been estimated about 12 to 15 meters long, or about 39, 32 feet. And it seems they got that bigger over geologic time. So smaller species earlier in history kind of evolved into this giant species that we get here. So as I mentioned, Tylosaurus means knob lizard, and it is related to monitor lizards and snakes. The taxonomy we don't really know about in that regard. We also know a little bit of its coloration as well. There's fossil evidence from skin of Tylosaurus that shows they have these really small diamond-shaped scales. They're actually quite similar to rattlesnakes and other modern reptiles, though it was much smaller in proportion to their body and actually looked quite small. And they each have a keel on them as well, which may have helped reduce drag. And also micro-analysis of these little scales showed that they may have had a dark coloration quite similar to leatherback sea turtles, and also have counter shading, which allows these guys to better camouflage in the water. So you look from the top, oh, it's just the dark of the ocean, and you look under it, oh, it's actually the light of the sun. So it really helps with predators, especially in the water. Most marine animals have some sort of counter shading, which is quite interesting. In terms of its discovery, these guys were first discovered, was the third new genus of mosasaur described after Platycarpus and Clydestes. This was basically found between Edward Drinker Cope and Charles Marsh during the Bone Wars. The first type specimen was described in 1869 by Cope with a fragmentary skull that was about 1.5 meters long, or about 5 feet. and all that. It's also quite interesting. The bone wars, things like that, but that's when it was first found. Those early depictions kind of really gave it a weird look. There were some people that suggested even almost the size of a blue whale, but those are obviously very much over-exaggerated, things like that. But yeah, but over time, we got a really good understanding as well. We have preserved specimens that have some soft tissue, so we originally thought that Mosasaurus kind of had a really long eel-like tail, but then more recent preserved specimens showed that Mosasaurs kind of have that much more shark or kind of shark or dolphin like fluke on their tail, which is quite interesting. And yeah, really, really cool animals. And the taxonomy, you can go on and on and on about the taxonomy of Tylosaurus because there's many different species and many genera have been split from Tylosaurus. So that's probably a bit too much for this video. This video is already getting long enough. But in terms of how it's related to other guys, these guys are in the family Mosasauridae, which is the greater group Mosasauroidea. And with related to groups including like Tanipharosaurus and Caecophilus, which are another interesting animals. And it's actually one of the earliest known derived mosasaurs, and they've been teeth kind of from like the Upper Tenorian, so about 90 million years ago, and lived right until the end of the Cretaceous or late Maastrichtian. So lived quite a long while. And these guys, as I mentioned, have been related to these other species of mosasaurs, things like that. The Western Pteroseaway, the T. progenitor actually, and T. neopalensis may actually be a chronospecies, where one species will grow into another, and branching off the anagenesis as well. So T. progenitor was the largest species, they're getting about 13 meters long, 12 meters long at the lowest estimate. Really, really cool animals, with lots of different species as well. There's also been looking into their growth. There's been a baby found, a small juvenile with an estimated about 12-inch head, based on the proportion of the brain case, as we look at these cute little babies here. So the juveniles, the specimen lacks the snout projections of Tylosaurus, which is present in juveniles, about 40 to 60 centimeters. So it suggests that the snout protrusion may actually rapidly at an early stage of life and develop, and actually may not be due to sexual selection and actually be more to ramming prey, similar to modern orca, which is quite an interesting fact. In terms of its metabolism as well, nearly all living squamates are cold-blooded or ectotherms, so they use the environment, so like basking and hiding to control their body temperature. But there are only a couple known kind of warm-blooded lizards or endothermic lizards, the black and white tegu, though there have been some research looking into different things about like the internal body temperature of mosasaurs, and actually suggest that these guys may have had slightly elevated body temperatures, so they may have been endothermic or potentially gigantothermic, using their large size to conserve heat, or just having some ability. Some animals are regionally endotherms, such as sharks, able to keep certain organs warm, and leatherback sea turtles, using the heat of their pectoral muscles, since they're swimming a lot. They use that to keep their bodies slightly warmer than the water around them, which is quite interesting. But evidence suggests that the internal body temperature of mosasaurs may be like 36 to 33 degrees respectively, which is a little bit warmer than a lot of species, but not quite as warm as kind of most mammals or birds, which is quite interesting. Because Ichthyornis is about 38 degrees Fahrenheit, Toxoteles is about 28 to 27 degrees, so it's kind of that little in between there. In terms of mobility, as I mentioned, they're originally thought to be very eel-like swimmers or allogiform swimmers, where they swim like a snake or an eel. But more evidence has looked into the tail region and suggests they have very flukes and things like that, much more rigid, swimming much more like a shark or a tuna in that regard. But these guys were very much seemed to be specialized as ambush predators, and they were quite lightweight for a mosasaur of its size. And they also would have had these large pelvic girdles, things like that, and highly calorous bones, which are likely filled with fat cells, which would have helped with buoyancy and allowed them to conserve their energy. And they actually were useful in traveling between ambush sites over long distances. So they're able to swim long distances and short bursts, but they weren't kind of pursuit predators. They were most likely ambush predators. In terms of feeding as well, being one of the largest marine carnivores of all time, they typically fed on things. They were apex predator in the ecosystem, so they would have been feeding on other mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, turtles, birds, bony fish, sharks, and things like that, and ammonites and giant squid as well. And there have been bite marks found in all sorts of different animals, such as Hesperornis, which is a type of diving bird, fish, Dolichorhynchops, which is a polycotyledonid plesiosaur, other mosasaurs, such as Platycarpus, and giant sea turtles as well, which is quite interesting. And things we also know from their social behavior is that they may have been quite aggressive to each other. We often found evidence of mosasaurs biting each other's faces, especially in Tylosaurus. Could mostly be a courtship thing as well, but it could very much likely be a territorial thing as well, which is quite interesting. And another thing about their paleopathology as well, we actually have evidence of them having decompression illness, which is known as the bends. So that happens when bone-damaging nitrogen bubbles built up from the inhaled air actually decompresses in their body, and it shows that these guys do have that to some extent, and also some issues with broken bones and things like that, where animals may have had fused vertebrae because they got damaged and then kind of remodeled as well from predator attacks, and also things like arthritis, just things that animals get by being animals. But yeah, really, really awesome. I'm definitely a big fan of this. Really, really wonderful. So yeah, we can have a look at these wonderful skins. I think Doc did a really great job of creating this mosasaur. This comes from the one from Jurassic World Evolution 2, but obviously edited the anatomy a lot. There actually was Amelia, who she's an expert in mosasaurs, things like that. I actually got to meet her SVP in 2019. She's a really lovely person. She consulted on this model, and yeah, one thing is really cool. I want to find that male. Where's the male? The male up here. The male here has got some really interesting patterns in here, inspired by Prehistoric Planet. So this is a really wonderful mod, and I think it's just come out wonderfully. So yeah, I think this would be a great place to end the video. So I really, really, really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to hit that little bell icon to get notified of anything. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.